Hello class, here we are already at week 7's video discussion board. Today I'm going to be discussing 3 articles from the Project Muse database that support my research on the history of counterinsurgency. These articles are primarily of background interest and deal mostly with questions of effectiveness in the application of counterinsurgency strategy. The first article that I will address is called The Myth of a Kinder and Gentler War. This article, written by Michael Cohen, discusses modern views about counterinsurgency. It specifically calls into question the idea that counterinsurgencies can be fought in a humane manner that does not violate our beliefs concerning human rights and human decency. The author uses a quote from Mark Bowden, the author of Black Hawk Down, to support what the kinder and gentler war is supposed to be. Mark Bowden says, in regard to modern Western counterinsurgency doctrine, that it should embrace distinctively liberal humanistic values like protecting civilians, cultural sensitivity, and a rigid adherence to ethical standards and the law. It is supposed to be a type of conflict where civilians are not coerced, they are not threatened and or harmed by military operations, but rather that they are protected for the purpose of gaining their trust and support in operations against the insurgents. What Mr. Cohen points out is the sad fact that these ideals are very difficult to achieve because war is still based on the application of brute force and it is always coercive. He advises nations to be cognizant of this and to avoid the temptation to enter into more and more conflicts simply because we believe that it's now possible to fight and defeat our enemies without the risk of widespread civilian casualties and damage to civilian cultures and infrastructure. So the next article is called Vietnam and the American Theory of Limited War by Stephen Rosen. This article is similar to the last one, except that it looks at the issue through the lens of the Vietnam War. It explores the different methods and tactics which were supposed to help the United States gain the trust of the South Vietnamese and undermine the Viet Cong. These methods involved things like forced relocation, the imprisonment of who we called bad guys or people who were supporting the North Vietnamese. It also at some points involved relocating friendly populations to areas that were more receptive to the American message. Unfortunately, what tended to happen is that these methods didn't work out very well, and in many ways they actually increased South Vietnamese resentment towards Americans, and it made them less likely to support our counterinsurgency operations. The third article is called Testing the Surge: Why Did Violence Decline in Iraq in 2007 by Stephen Biddle, Jeffrey Friedman, and Jacob N. Shapiro. And this article looks at the situation in Iraq in 2007 to determine exactly what precipitated the sharp decline in violence that took place. The Bush administration and the military attributed this decline in violence to the additional 30,000 troops that were surged into the country, and also to General Petraeus's new tactic of taking soldiers off of the large bases and putting them on smaller bases that were more closely located with the communities that they were there to influence. Another theory that's been offered up by certain intellectuals and certain regional experts is something called the Anbar Awakening. So this is an alternative theory to maybe the surge is why the violence decreased. There's also this idea that maybe the Anbar Awakening was why violence decreased. And the Anbar Awakening was a civilian uprising against Al-Qaeda in the Anbar province, which is basically Fallujah, that spread across the country and resulted in the formation of an organization called the Sons of Iraq, which was a grassroots militia dedicated to providing local security in communities and in neighborhoods. The author also suggests a few other theories that have been put forward as well, such as high-value target targeting, I guess is how I would say that, but it doesn't sound right, which is essentially where American forces target Al-Qaeda upper leadership, take them out, and thereby, dismantle the Al-Qaeda organization. And another theory was something called geographical cleansing, where this theory holds that that the violence that was taking place up until 2007 was primarily sectarian, and that in these regions where this was going on, they finally killed each other out, or one sect would flee and leave the other one, they're able to dominate that particular landscape. And so essentially what they're saying is there was no one left to kill, so the violence declines. There are some problems with this theory because the decline in violence does not necessarily correlate with the areas where the sectarian violence was the strongest. So a lot of experts think that idea may not hold water. But anyway, each of these articles fell well within my research. They're perfect. They're relevant. They contain multiple levels of information. They address counterinsurgency in detail and in the big picture, from the point of view of politics, and and also with a more personal type of viewpoint. So I'm really glad to have been introduced to Project Muse, and I predict that I'll probably be using it quite a bit in the future. Thanks for listening, and you guys have a good weekend.